It hadn't been 30 minutes since our divorce was finalized, and my mother-in-law was already cheerfully taking her entire family out for a celebratory meal to wash away the bad luck. But when they arrived home, the entire extended family panicked at the sight that awaited them. Before I got married, I, Delaney, felt incredibly lucky to have met a good man. Vance. So gentle, so attentive, always promising to protect me for the rest of his life. I was once so naive, thinking he was the best choice I had ever made. However, after just a few years of living together, the true nature of my husband's family began to show. And I realized that some promises are only beautiful when they are still on the lips. That day, the sky over Chicago was a dreary gray. A heavy rain poured down on the concrete steps of the Cook County Courthouse. I stood amidst the damp air rising from the cold tile floor, my hand clutching the still fresh divorce decree. Vance's messy signature felt as cold as a final goodbye. The courtroom doors had just swung shut behind me. The sound of the rain fell like a whip. I hadn't even had a chance to compose myself when a familiar, cynical voice came from behind me. Well, that's finally over. Now my son can get his life back on track, without a dead weight dragging him down. I turned around. Cordelia, my mother-in-law, her designer trench coat perfectly pressed, was already gripping her son's arm tightly. A triumphant smile played on her lips. It was a smile I knew all too well, like a fishbone stuck in my throat for the 10 years I had been her daughter-in-law. Vance stood beside her, lighting a cigarette. He didn't look at me, his eyes hastily stared at the gray rain in front of him. I saw the flame of the cigarette reflect on his cheek, cold and distant, as if I were a stranger. Cordelia waved her hand. Let's go, son. Tonight, the whole family is eating at that upscale seafood spot on Navy Pier. A big celebration to cast off the bad luck. 10 years of being held back. Today, that dark cloud is finally gone. Loud laughter erupted. Vance's relatives crowded around him as if they had just shed a heavy burden. Meanwhile, I stood frozen. My eyes stung from a mixture of rain and shame. My twin children, Beckett and Sloane, stood close to my legs. Their undersized raincoats were frayed at the hems. Their hair was wet and stuck to their foreheads. Beckett looked up and asked, his voice clear but piercing my heart. Mom, Grandma said you were a dead weight dragging Dad down. What does that mean, Mom? I knelt to wipe the rain from my son's cheek, unsure if it was rainwater or my own tears flowing. I smiled, though my heart ached. A dead weight is a burden people don't want to carry, honey. But I will carry you both, for my whole life, because you two are the greatest gifts God has ever given me. A flash of lightning split the sky. Sloane flinched and hugged my leg tightly. I took a deep breath and led my two children out of the courthouse plaza. No resentment, no complaints, just the heavy rain pouring down on our three backs. Outside, a black Uber SUV pulled up. Inside were Vance and his mother, laughing heartily as they discussed the menu for tonight's feast. Lobster, Maryland crab cakes, spicy Creole sauce, grilled salmon. Cordelia's last words were faintly audible through the rolled-down car window. Ever since that Delaney stepped foot in our estate, everything has been a disaster. Divorcing her was the best decision you ever made. I didn't cry. They say tears flow downward, but I had been crying for 10 years. There was nothing left. Upon arriving at our cramped studio apartment in a walk-up building in Pilsen, I hung the worn raincoats on a rusty hook. The 200-square-foot room was drafty, its walls showing signs of peeling paint. But at least here, no one threw ceramic plates at my face. No one called me a parasite. No one questioned why I had given birth to a daughter. Beckett pulled on my sleeve, asking softly, Mom, what are we having for dinner? I sat down and hugged my children. There's still a box of macaroni and cheese in the pantry. We'll have that tonight. Tomorrow night, after I get paid for my extra tutoring session, we can order a big pepperoni pizza. Sloane smiled, her gappy teeth looking adorable. The child didn't know. To afford a simple bowl of chicken noodle soup, I had pawned my only diamond wedding earring a few days ago just to keep the electricity running. I laid out a sleeping mat for my children. The cold seeped into my back, but my heart felt warm. Maybe sometimes, loss is God's way of giving you relief. I sat by the window, turned on a thrift store desk lamp, and placed the divorce decree before me. The ink had bled. Vance's signature was fading, just like the promises in his life. The rain outside still roared on the metal fire escape, just like my life, full of turmoil before it would finally calm. I whispered to myself, Delaney, from this day forward, you are no one's punching bag, no longer a shadow in someone else's house. From this day forward, you are the mother of Beckett and Sloane, and you will lead them out of this storm." Outside, the sound of thunder slowly faded. Beside me, my 2 children slept soundly. And at that moment, I saw one thing very clearly. When one door of suffering closes, a door of strength will open. That night, as my children slept to the hum of a rattling window air conditioning unit, I sat leaning against the wall with a hollow feeling. The feeling of being cast out of my in-laws' massive estate sounded painful, but it actually felt like I had just been released from the cold shackles that had bound me for a decade. For 10 years, I had lived like a shadow in my own life. I closed my eyes, and memories flooded back to the first day I set foot in the Kensington family estate. I had been married to Vance for only a week. My in-laws threw a huge catered reception that spilled from the terrace into the grand living room. The tables were laden with dishes, roast turkey, smoked beef brisket, garlic mashed potatoes, artisan skewers, and a massive baked salmon at the center of the long table. At that time, I thought I had entered a place full of warmth. People say marrying into old money is like entering a different life. I truly believed it. But that very night, Cordelia called me into the kitchen. Her voice was low but as sharp as a scalpel. "A new bride must know her place. This family has only one son. He is my legacy. As a woman, you must watch your behavior and your words. As for the catering mess and cleaning the estate, from now on, that's your responsibility." The words were colder than the Chicago winter air. I could only smile awkwardly, thinking all mothers-in-law were stern. But I didn't know. I had just entered a life where I would have to hold back until my soul ran dry. The second year, I was pregnant. I looked forward to it every day, thinking that with a child, my husband's family would love me more. But fate had other plans. I had a miscarriage. One night, while prepping dinner in the kitchen, my stomach cramped violently. I had to lean against the marble island to bear it. Vance drove me to the emergency room in silence. The baby couldn't be saved. When I regained consciousness, the first thing Cordelia said wasn't to ask if I was okay, but to sneer. "She has weak genes. That's why she couldn't carry the child to term. People say a good wife brings a man prosperity. If not, she drags his business into the ground." Now I believe those words, like a knife slicing directly into my heart. Lying there in the hospital bed, my tears streamed onto the stiff pillow without a sound. Vance stood beside me, looking at his phone. He didn't defend me, nor did he comfort me. "It is what it is, Delaney. Maybe it just wasn't meant to be." His words from that day on became an invisible padlock that sealed my heart. 2 years later, I was pregnant again, this time with twins, a boy and a girl. The obstetrician even smiled and said, "Wow, you've got $1 million family right here." I was thrilled. I thought from now on my mother-in-law would accept me. But when I brought the 2 babies home from the maternity ward, Cordelia glanced at them briefly and then whispered to Vance, just loud enough for me to hear, "A boy and a girl. It's a split investment. A daughter just drains trust funds. I told you she doesn't belong in our tax bracket." I stood frozen, my hands holding 2 tiny red infants wrapped in hospital blankets. My heart felt like it was in freefall. They say blood is thicker than water. Yet, 2 drops of this family's blood had just cried their way into the world and were already rejected. I could only hug my children tighter, as if clinging to the last shred of my dignity. But the suffering didn't stop there. Vance's real estate business began to tank. He made a terrible investment in a commercial zoning project and fell into massive debt. I taught middle school in the morning, tutored kids for the SATs in the afternoon, and did freelance transcription work at night until my eyes were bloodshot. Every month, I scraped together every spare dollar to buy formula and diapers. One day, I had a fever of 102 degrees, but I still had to teach. When I got home, I tried to make oatmeal for the kids, but my hands trembled so much the ceramic bowl slipped and shattered on the floor. Cordelia saw it and clicked her tongue. Such a sickly, fragile girl. Completely useless to this family. And Vance, every time a deal fell through or he came home smelling of bourbon, he took it out on me. "Since I married you, my luck went down the drain. They say a good wife is the backbone of a successful man. But a jinx ruins him. Looks like I got stuck with the jinx." I listened, my spirit crushed. For 10 years as a daughter-in-law, I had memorized every snide remark from my mother-in-law, memorized my husband's cowardly silence, memorized their disgusted glares when I stumbled. The only thing keeping me breathing was my 2 children. There were nights when Vance was passed out drunk on the sofa, and I would sit at the kitchen island. The pendant lights illuminated my exhausted face. I would open my students' essays, holding a red pen with a trembling hand. I remembered a saying my grandmother once told me. A woman's life is only as stable as the man she anchors herself to. I didn't understand it back then, thinking it was just outdated advice. Now, I felt the trap closing in. In the Kensington mansion, I was the hired help. All the domestic labor fell to me. At every holiday dinner, I ate last in the kitchen. During Thanksgiving or Christmas galas, I was on my feet from dawn till midnight. But no one saw me as family. The slightest mistake, and Cordelia would publicly humiliate me in front of the country club crowd. Once, she pointed a manicured finger at my face and spat a sentence I would never forget. A woman who can't even give this family a proper heir to our legacy. What is her value? I hugged my twins, who were only 3 at the time. My tears fell onto their soft hair, but I didn't dare to scream back, because arguing was pointless. They had already designated me as their scapegoat. I began to change one stormy night. After putting the children to bed, I heard whispers from the den. Mother and son were discussing plans to liquidate assets, to take out a fraudulent second mortgage on the estate deed, but they were adamant about hiding the paperwork from me, terrified I would demand half. I stood in the hallway, my blood running cold. I realized that if I continued to play the submissive wife, my life and my children's futures would be drained away like water down a sink. That night, hunched over my laptop in the dark, I wasn't searching for casserole recipes. My search history was filled with terms like pro bono divorce lawyers, Chicago, and legal aid for financially abused spouses. The next morning, shaking with adrenaline, I made a call. That's how I found Marlo. She wasn't cheap, but she saw the quiet desperation in my eyes and agreed to a deferred payment plan. When I told her about the secret fraudulent mortgage on our marital home, her eyes widened. Delaney, that's not just grounds for divorce. That's federal bank fraud. The lenders take that very seriously. We can use this. Marlo leaned back in her leather office chair a few weeks later, a sharp glint in her eyes. Buying out their debt directly is complicated and slow. But we don't have to pull the trigger to make them shoot themselves in the foot. What do you mean? I asked. What if an anonymous, highly documented tip about that fraudulent collateral landed on the desk of the bank's Federal Risk Assessment Department? A slow, cold smile spread across my face. They would freeze Vance's corporate accounts. They would call in all their commercial loans immediately to mitigate their losses. Bingo, Marlo confirmed, tapping her pen on the mahogany desk. We don't knock on their door. The feds and the bank will. And they knock with a battering ram. It happened faster than I expected. A week later, my phone rang. It was Marlo, her voice electric. Turn on the local business news network, Delaney. Now. The Kensington Group is filing for Chapter 11 emergency bankruptcy. Looks like someone's house of cards just imploded. I didn't need to turn on the TV. I could already imagine the sheer panic behind Cordelia's Botoxed face. It wasn't a slow foreclosure. It was the sudden, violent annihilation of their entire financial empire, and I had been the one to strike the match. I folded the divorce decree and sighed. In the cramped studio apartment, the ticking of the cheap wall clock sounded louder than my heartbeat. 10 years of misery were over. From this day forward, my tears were dried up. I would step out of that toxic shadow for my 2 children and for myself. The storm outside had passed, but inside me, a quiet, powerful hurricane was just taking shape. That morning, I took Beckett and Sloane to school as usual. They chattered about their art teacher asking for construction paper, about a classmate who had a new set of markers. These mundane details made my heart lighter. Although deep inside there was still a lingering ache. I stood at the school crosswalk, waiting until they disappeared through the double doors before walking back to the bus stop. The morning streets were gridlocked with honking cabs. Commuters rushed by with their coffees. As for me, every step felt like dragging lead weights. Today was the day I would officially sign the final divorce papers. Not because I wanted a broken home, but because I had no other way to shield my kids from the wreckage. The family court chambers felt freezing, the air conditioning blasting like a meat locker. I sat at the petitioner's table. The child custody agreement was neatly stacked in front of me. My hand trembled, but my gaze was steady. I had been dragged through enough mud to understand one thing. If I wasn't ruthless today, the rest of my life would be dictated by monsters. Vance walked in, his custom suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He sat across the aisle, avoiding eye contact, just exhaling loudly. We were strangers now. A few minutes later, Cordelia shoved the heavy doors open. Her designer heels clicked aggressively on the hardwood floor. She glared at me as if I were something scraped off the bottom of her shoe. For months, she had been telling anyone who would listen, dropping that gold digger is the best thing to happen to us. Our estate will finally be cleansed. I kept my chin down, refusing to engage. Taking the high road is better than wrestling in the mud with pigs. I chose silence so I wouldn't become a monster like them. The judge read from the docket, his voice monotonous. When he reached the division of assets, Vance suddenly straightened up, glaring at me. They thought I was an ignorant schoolteacher. They thought they had successfully buried the second mortgage in shell companies. They didn't realize that my years of silent servitude were actually years of gathering ammunition. I calmly slid copies of the loan documents, the ones Vance and his mother had forged my signature on, across to the judge. I had tracked them down myself, verified every notary seal and banking signature. The judge stared at the papers for a long minute, clearly shocked that a tired-looking public school teacher had compiled a bulletproof fraud dossier. Cordelia saw the bank logos and shrieked, "You absolute snake! How did you get your hands on those private files?" I lifted my head, locking eyes with her for the first time in a decade without flinching. "Public records and subpoenas, Cordelia. The law gave them to me." The courtroom fell dead silent. Vance went pale, tilting his head slightly as if seeing the woman he married for the very first time. The hearing was swift. I was granted full primary custody. Regarding the assets, the judge noted the marital estate was currently under a federal tax lien, pending criminal fraud investigations. When the bailiff slid the final judgment toward me, my chest felt hollow yet remarkably light. This marriage didn't end with a bang. It had died of starvation years ago. Vance signed his name. His strokes were erratic, the ink smudging on the thick paper. When I gripped the pen, my fingers were like ice. But I signed it with one fluid, irreversible motion. Just like that, a nightmare chapter snapped shut. Leaving the courthouse, the concrete steps baked under the sudden afternoon sun. Cordelia let out an exaggerated sigh of relief and patted Vance's back. "Tonight, the whole family toasts at the country club. Make sure you dress well." I heard it and felt a wave of disgust. They were facing federal ruin and still prioritizing a celebratory dinner. Meanwhile, I was heading back to a tiny box apartment, wondering how to stretch $20 until Friday. Vance looked at the pavement, hands shoved in his slacks, completely ignoring me. I didn't care. A dead tree offers no shade. There was no point in expecting him to be a shelter. Cordelia couldn't resist one last venomous shot. "Well, we will enjoy our wealth in peace now. You go your way, and from now on, never set foot on my property again." I smiled a genuine, chilling smile. "I wouldn't dream of it, Cordelia." The summer storm rolled in abruptly. Just like a decade prior, I shielded Beckett and Sloane under my tote bag, gripping their little hands as we navigated the wet sidewalks. My eyes stung from the wind, but the tears were gone. As I hoisted them onto the city transit bus, Sloane tugged at my damp cardigan. "Mommy, are we never going back to Grandma's big house?" "No, sweetie," I murmured, pulling her onto my lap. "From now on, the three of us have our own headquarters. It's tiny, but it's safe." Beckett looked at me with his solemn brown eyes. "Mom, will the roof leak when it rains really hard?" I chuckled, kissing the top of his head. "If it leaks, we'll make a game out of catching the water in pots and pans. But in our house, the love will never run dry." That night, tucked away in the damp studio, I spread a thick stack of manila folders across the wobbly IKEA table. On top was the distressed debt acquisition contract Marlo and I had been quietly negotiating with a third-party firm for months. Tomorrow, federal marshals would be knocking on the Kensington estate's mahogany doors. Not me. The law. I closed my eyes and whispered, "From this day on, they no longer have the right to trample on me and my children." Outside, thunder rattled the window pane, beating a drum for my independence. That night, the sound of rain hitting the metal fire escape outside the studio sounded like an irregular heartbeat. I sat alone beside the old wooden table. The yellow lamplight illuminated a thick stack of files I had collected bit by bit. Debt documents, mortgage papers, loan contracts, bank statements, all neatly stored in a black folder. They say a steady drip of water can wear away a solid stone, but cruel words leave a permanent scar. For 10 years, I was eroded by those cruel words. Today, these papers would restore the justice I deserved. My 2 children slept soundly behind a faded blue curtain. Occasionally, Sloane would stir, calling out in her sleep, "Mommy." I turned, my heart softening. Without them, I might not have had the strength to get this far. I sat quietly in the corner booth of the diner down the street from the Kensington estate, my hands wrapped around a ceramic mug of herbal tea. My heartbeat was remarkably steady. The waitress wiped down the counter and asked, "Honey, are you in some kind of trouble? You look a million miles away this early in the morning." I shook my head slowly. "No, ma'am. I'm just waiting for the storm to pass. The older woman smiled, topping off my hot water. Every storm runs out of rain eventually, sweetheart. A heavy downpour just washes the streets clean. Those words seemed to touch the bottom of my heart. I thought I would be trembling, would feel pain. But strangely, I only felt light, as if I had just shed a cloak that had bound me for 10 years. I remembered my grandmother's advice. You reap what you sow. There is no need for revenge. What you plant is what you will harvest. The massive estate in the distance suddenly lit up on the second floor. Then the sound of panicked voices carried through the crisp morning air. Even from afar, I could sense the chaos inside. Perhaps at this moment, mother and son were shocked when the legal representatives informed them that the house was no longer theirs. I didn't move, didn't run over there. I just sipped my tea, murmuring to myself. What is the point of a bitter confrontation when everything has already been decided by a federal judge? An hour later, my phone vibrated. You don't need to come here. Everything is proceeding according to the law. I nodded. My eyes watched a small child across the street splashing in a puddle and laughing. Thank you, Marlo. From now on, I'm living strictly for my kids. Marlo was silent for a few seconds, then said, Delaney, you're stronger than you think. I smiled faintly. Not strong, Marlo. Just a mother backed into a corner. When I arrived at the studio, my 2 children ran to hug me. The cramped room suddenly felt so warm that there was no space left for sadness. I hugged them and whispered, From today, we start over. Okay, my loves? Beckett asked, Mom, do we have a new house now? I smiled. Not yet, but Mommy will work for it, I promise. Sloane hugged my neck. Then you've got this, Mom. We love you so much. I laughed, feeling as if my heart had just been stitched back together with warm thread. I looked at my 2 children, then at the sky outside the window. The rain had truly stopped. That was the decisive day. The day the mahogany door of the Kensington family estate was knocked on. The day I understood that a woman who has been silent for a long time isn't weak, but is simply waiting for the right moment to strike. And I had truly struck. In the afternoon, when I picked up Beckett and Sloane from school, as soon as we entered the courtyard of our building, I saw my landlady standing with her arms crossed, her expression anxious. Before I could even ask, she pointed to the edge of the sidewalk. Delaney, I think someone's been looking for you. They've been pacing back and forth in front of the gate for an hour. I froze for a moment. The image of the Kensington family flashed in my mind. I held my children's hands and walked more slowly. Sure enough, Vance was standing there, leaning against a brick wall. His clothes were damp from the residual rain. His hair was limp, his face ashen like someone who had just been hit by a freight train. He saw me, and his eyes widened. Delaney, is this true? I didn't answer. I just pushed my children to stand behind me, keeping a distance so no one would get hurt. Vance swallowed hard, his voice trembling. They said the house was seized because of you, because you were behind it. You bought the debt. You did all this in secret. He asked as if he couldn't believe that the woman he had always considered only capable of cooking and grading papers could make his entire empire crumble. I looked straight into Vance's eyes without resentment, only with the calm born of surviving hell. I didn't steal anything from you, Vance. I just legally acquired the distressed debt that you willingly signed off on. Everything is according to the law. Vance shook his head repeatedly, as if denying reality. But why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you give me a warning? Why did you let everything happen like this? I laughed. A cynical, hollow laugh I never thought could come from my mouth. I have been screaming for 10 years, Vance. But you never listened. You only listened to your mother. Vance stood frozen. His face, for the first time, made me feel more pity than anger. But even pity had no meaning anymore. Some relationships have been dead for a long time, just waiting for the day to be buried. To avoid attracting attention, I brought the children into the building and closed the lobby door. I heard Vance's voice still outside, desperate. Delaney, I was wrong. Can I see the kids? I stood still, my hand on the brass doorknob. The mother in me felt a pang of pain, but the sight of the woman who had been trampled on for 10 years was as hard as concrete. I opened the door slightly, looking at him through the crack. You can see the children, but strictly as their father, not as someone who disrupts our peace. Vance hung his head like a convict. I continued. You want to see the kids? Fine, but you have to clean up your act. No bourbon, no gambling on bad investments, no blaming everyone else for your failures. If you can do that, I won't stop you. He lifted his head, his eyes red. I promise. I nodded, then closed the heavy door before he could see the tears starting to well up in my eyes. That night, I received a call from an unknown number. On the other end, a familiar hysterical cry. Delaney, why are you so evil? My legacy is in ruins because of you. You're deliberately trying to destroy my entire family, aren't you? It was Cordelia. Her voice was shrill, as if trying to shatter my phone screen. I calmly put the phone on speaker while continuing to fold the children's laundry. I didn't let her hear even a slight tremor in my voice. I'm not destroying anyone, Cordelia. You are simply reaping exactly what you sowed. Shut up. Give me back my house. I fed you for 10 years. Now you stab me in the back. I laughed faintly. You fed me? I cooked, scrubbed your marble floors, took care of your son, my children, and even organized every single massive holiday gala for your pretentious relatives. I worked until my body was broken. Did you feed me with anything but insults? There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then Cordelia screamed, Remember this, your life will never be peaceful. I replied softly, I don't need your blessing, Cordelia. I create my own peace. I hung up. From that moment, I felt I had truly stepped out of the shadow of that family. Without fear, without regret, without looking back. The next day, the entire school district was buzzing. Someone had leaked the news that the wealthy Kensington family in the exclusive gated community had their assets seized by federal marshals due to mounting fraud. Some people even drove by just to gawk. I sat in my classroom, closed the door, not looking, not getting involved. Beckett asked innocently, Mom, why do I hear the neighbors saying a big house got taken away? I stroked his hair, smiling calmly. Because when adults make mistakes, they have to face the consequences. Just like you, if you spill juice, you have to wipe it up. If you drop a toy, you have to pick it up. It's as simple as that. Sloan hugged me from behind. In that case, you never make mistakes, Mom, because you're always cleaning up after me. I laughed, hugging both my children tightly. No, I didn't make a mistake by bringing you two into the world. That night, I received a short text. Delaney, you won. But remember, defeating others is easy. Defeating yourself is the hard part. It was from Marlowe. I stared at the glowing screen for a long time. Maybe it was true. I had outsmarted the Kensington Empire. But my biggest challenge now was to overcome the trauma within myself. I looked at my two sleeping children and whispered in the dim light. From this day on, Mommy will live as a true mother, not as a hired servant, not as someone who accepts her miserable fate, but as myself. Outside, the night rain began to fall again, but this time, its sound was softer, as if the Chicago sky itself was saying, You are on the right path, Delaney. A few days after the seizure, I thought my heart would be in turmoil, but strangely, it wasn't. I was as calm as Lake Michigan after a great storm. Maybe because I had already experienced the greatest suffering in my life long ago. While I returned to my routine of teaching, picking up the kids, and freelance transcribing, the entire Kensington network was buzzing like a disturbed beehive. The news spread quickly through their country club circles. People gossiped, some praised, some condemned, some pitied, some sneered. But I didn't care. People will talk. If I were still afraid of country club gossip, I might not have survived until today. One morning, as I was teaching an 8th grade literature class, my phone kept vibrating. I turned it off, but my heart was restless. After the bell rang, I checked my phone and saw 5 missed calls from Tamsin, my former sister-in-law. Her text message was frantic. Delaney, Mom collapsed. The cardiologist said it's a severe stress-induced heart episode. Can you come to the hospital? I paused. For a moment, my heart softened. My former mother-in-law, no matter how cruel, was still the mother of the man I once called my husband and the grandmother of my 2 children. But whether to visit or not was another matter. I replied, I'm busy teaching. Let the family handle it. If she stabilizes, let me know. My hand trembled slightly. Not out of pity, but because I knew if I showed up now, all their fraudulent mistakes would be blamed on me. I was exhausted. I had no more energy to be anyone's human shield. 2 days later, Tamsin called again. Delaney, please, just listen to me for a second. Mom keeps calling your name. She said she was wrong. I sat on the edge of my folding chair and sighed. Tamsin, your mother and I are completely done. Tamsin cried. But, Delaney, our family is completely destroyed now. Vance lost his broker's license. Calls from debt collectors keep flooding in. Mom thinks you're taking revenge, so she's having panic attacks. I closed my eyes. Not pained, just weary. Listen carefully, Tamsin. I'm not taking revenge on anyone. I only reported what was illegal. Vance signed the fraudulent papers. He has to pay the feds. Your mother emotionally tortured me for a decade. I never retaliated. If I wanted revenge, I would have burned her reputation down long ago. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then Tamsin sighed. I know, Delaney. It's just that Mom is old. She can't handle this reality check. I replied softly, what goes around comes around. I am neither happy nor sad. Their circus is no longer my problem. Putting down the phone, my heart was still. A few years ago, I might have cried and rushed to the hospital with a casserole. But now, my tears and energy were strictly reserved for my 2 children. Outside the window, the city skyline was bright. I looked up and murmured, what is mine? I will protect. What is lost? Let it go. That afternoon, I picked up Beckett and Sloan from school. They chattered about who got a perfect score on their spelling test, who got a gold star from the teacher. I listened with a warm heart. When we got to our apartment building, Beckett looked at me and asked, Mom, why aren't you sad anymore today? Yesterday, I still saw you crying. I bent down, hugged him, and kissed his forehead. Because Mom knows that being sad won't fix anything. Mom has to be tough to help you both move forward. Sloan hugged me from one side, Beckett from the other. At that moment, I felt I was no longer alone in the trenches. That night, I opened my budget spreadsheet again, calculating every cent. Extra tutoring income, transcription fees, my teaching salary. The amount wasn't huge, but it was enough for the 3 of us to live simply and safely. I turned on the desk fan and started transcribing a thick corporate document. My wrists ached, my eyes were tired, but my spirit was bright. I was rebuilding my life, dollar by dollar. Around 10 at night, there was a sudden heavy knock on the door. I was startled and peeked through the peephole. It was Vance. I opened the door slightly, leaving the chain locked. What is it, this late at night? Vance stood dejectedly, his face gaunt, his shirt dirty with what looked like drywall dust. He had probably just been working off the books as a construction laborer. Delaney, Mom's in the ICU. I don't know who to talk to. Can I just stand here for a minute? I folded my arms. You can stand at the edge of the sidewalk, but keep your voice down. The kids are asleep. Vance leaned against the brick wall outside, his voice hoarse. I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I was arrogant. I was stupid. I let Mom torture you. I let you bear everything without me lifting a finger. I remained silent. Not because I was furious, but because those words came 10 years too late. Vance choked up. Delaney, the estate is gone. But seeing Mom hooked up to monitors, I just realized how heavy your suffering was. I was a coward. I looked at him for a moment and then said, it's good that you finally realize it, but realizing it doesn't mean I am ever coming back. I am completely done. Vance looked down, his shoulders shaking. I know. I don't dare to hope for that. I just want to be able to see the kids sometimes. His voice was choked, like someone running out of air. I said slowly, you will be allowed to see the children if you stay sober and get an honest job. I will not let them suffer a fate like mine. Vance nodded like a man who had just received a life sentence but felt relieved to finally have some boundaries. He walked away with a stumbling gait. I watched him, my heart completely detached. No sense of satisfaction, not happy, not sad, just light, as if I had just dropped a boulder I had been carrying for 10 years. That night, I took out an old spiral notebook from the bottom of my closet. The first page had 2 words written on it, new plan. I wrote, start an affordable tutoring program for single mothers. Find a larger rental place when my credit improves. Save for a better school district for the kids. Do not go back to the past. Do not let anyone manipulate me again. I underlined the last sentence 3 times. Outside, the wind blew off the lake, and leaves rustled against the glass. I knew a new journey was opening up for the 3 of us, and I would keep walking forward without a single glance back. After the night Vance stood at my door, a few days later, the whole neighborhood around the former Kensington residence was abuzz with gossip. I didn't need to dig for it. The news always found me. The Kensington family, so incredibly arrogant when they were wealthy, was now drowning in federal indictments. People say when you have money, everyone wants to be your friend. When you go bankrupt, you are a ghost. It's the absolute truth. One afternoon, as I was entering the teacher's lounge, Mrs. Carmichael, a veteran colleague, whispered to me, Delaney, I heard your former mother-in-law is now running a hot dog cart down in the financial district. She had only been open a week before she got shut down by city code enforcement for blocking the pedestrian walkway. I lifted my head and smiled faintly. Oh, is that so? Well, that is her reality now. Mrs. Carmichael looked at me for a moment, then nodded in respect. You are incredibly classy to think that way. Many people in your position would have driven down there just to gloat. The fact that you can maintain your peace of mind is excellent. I just smiled without saying anything. This tranquility didn't come easily. I earned it with countless sleepless nights, with 10 years of emotional warfare. That afternoon, while I was doing laundry at the laundromat, Tamsin called, her voice defeated. Delaney, Mom has no one now. Vance is hauling concrete from morning till night. None of our country club friends will even return our calls. Can you come to the clinic and talk to Mom for a bit? I paused, holding a wet child's shirt. It took me a long time to answer. Tamsin, I'm not resentful, not angry. But your mother and I have zero ties anymore. If she needs a prescription, refilled, or groceries, just send me a text. I'll help with the basics. But as for meeting face to face, absolutely not. Tamsin was silent for a long time, then said, I understand, Delaney. I watched you suffer back then, but was too scared of her to defend you. Now I realize that karma doesn't miss, does it? I didn't answer. I knew Tamsin was being honest, and life always balances the scales eventually. Meanwhile, my life, though strictly budgeted, was incredibly peaceful. Every morning I taught, in the afternoon I picked up the kids, and at night I transcribed legal documents. I lived the same routine, but with a completely liberated mindset. I no longer walked on eggshells, no longer flinched at loud noises, no longer had to analyze my former mother-in-law's toxic moods or hear Vance's drunken insults. One night, as I was preparing my lesson plans, Beckett sat beside me, drawing 3 stick figures, a mother and her 2 children. He asked, Mom, our apartment is tiny, but why do I feel so much happier here than when we lived in the giant mansion? I laughed. Because a giant but cold mansion is like a beautiful vase with no water, honey. A tiny apartment packed with love is all we need. Sloane hugged my neck. Mom is way warmer than a giant mansion. I hugged them both, my heart melting into a puddle. One weekend, I took the children to a public park and accidentally ran into a couple who were distant relatives of my former husband's family. They saw me from a distance and whispered loudly, That's Delaney. Turns out she's the brilliant one. Cordelia treated her like trash. Now look who is laughing. I heard everything but didn't bother turning around. Those praises came a decade too late, like wilted supermarket flowers placed on a grave already overgrown with weeds. I just held my children's hands and kept walking toward the swings. The lake wind blew strong. My hair flew wildly, as if the breeze was carrying away my invisible chains. Early the next week, Vance suddenly sent me $200 via Zelle. The accompanying memo read, For Beckett and Sloane's school supplies. This is all I can scrape together this month. I will try to pick up extra shifts next month. I stared at the banking notification for a long time. $200 was barely anything in Chicago. But this was the first time in over 10 years he had taken the initiative to financially support his children without me having to beg him through tears. I replied briefly, Received. Thank you. Without a guilt trip, without bringing up the fraudulent past, without scolding, just like 2 divorced adults navigating co-parenting. Vance replied again, Delaney, I am trying to get sober and start over. Don't worry, I won't cause drama. I know exactly what I destroyed. I put down the phone, breathing a light sigh. For the first time, I didn't feel a spike of adrenaline when I saw his name on my screen. I just felt he was officially a ghost in my new life. The next day, as I was carrying groceries up the stairs, my landlady came out. Delaney, I've seen you hustling so hard these past few weeks, and your posture is completely different. When a woman makes her own way and stands on her own 2 feet, no one can ever look down on her again. I smiled, shifting the grocery bags. Yes, ma'am. I am learning how to stand tall. The landlady patted my shoulder. Good. Keep at it and soon you'll be flying. I laughed, but inside it felt electric, as if a massive runway was clearing right in front of me. That night, as my children slept soundly, I opened my laptop and typed the first line of a bold business plan. An initiative to open a support center for single parents, offering free or highly subsidized tutoring and legal guidance. I typed every word, my heart racing with excitement. I knew that at this moment, I was no longer just a victim surviving the wreckage. I was building an empire, A path I had never dared to dream of while trapped in that toxic mansion. A path of financial freedom, of courage, and of radical self-reliance. And I would pave it all the way to the top. That morning, I took Beckett and Sloane for a walk past the sprawling property that was once home to the Kensington dynasty. A few months ago, this estate looked flawless and intimidating. Luxury cars came and went. Now its wrought iron security gate was chained shut, a foreclosure notice taped to the pillar, looking as pathetic as a deflated balloon. I stood looking at it from the sidewalk. My heart was neither triumphant nor depressed, just detached, like looking at an old high school yearbook. Sloane pulled my hand. "Mom, are there bad people inside?" I smiled. "No, honey. Now it belongs to the bank." Beckett asked eagerly, "Can we go sneak into the backyard then, Mom?" I shook my head. "We're just passing by on our walk. There are some places that once you escape, you never go back to." After saying that, I felt a literal weight drop from my shoulders. The final cord tying me to the past had snapped. From that day on, I truly began to live for the future. I picked up extra teaching shifts, transcribed late into the night, and every evening I refined my business plan to open a community center for single mothers, women like me who had hit rock bottom but refused to stay down. Marlo came over for coffee and reviewed the binder I had put together with hands trembling from adrenaline. She read it silently for 10 minutes, then looked up, her sharp eyes gleaming. "Delaney, this is a phenomenal business model. You can actually pull this off. And I have some investor connections. Actually, I know the absolute perfect commercial location for it." I frowned, taking a sip of coffee. "A location? Where in Chicago, Marlo? Rent is insane." Marlo propped her chin on the table, a wicked grin spreading across her face. "Right inside your former in-laws' foreclosed estate." I nearly dropped my mug. The image of the chained iron gate flashed in my mind. Marlo pulled a thick legal contract from her designer briefcase and slapped it on my wobbly table. "Vanguard Holdings LLC is now the legal owner after buying out the federal auction, and they want to launch a non-profit community initiative for the tax write-off. The director of that project is you." I was choked with a wave of poetic justice, so strong it made me dizzy. A place that had been my personal prison for 10 years was about to become the headquarters for my greatest triumph. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of anxiety, but because my blood was buzzing with the thrill of a woman stepping into her power. 3 months later, the Kensington mansion had been completely gutted and reborn. The grand living room, where I used to serve hors d'oeuvres to snobby socialites, was converted into a bright classroom, its walls painted a cheerful pale yellow. Large bay windows welcomed the morning sun. The immaculate lawn was now planted with hydrangeas and lilac bushes. I named the place the Beacon House. This was a victory I had never dared to imagine. A sanctuary for mothers like me who had cried in the laundry room, who had their bank accounts drained by abusive husbands, who were told their lives were over after divorce. Beckett and Sloane ran around the vast backyard, laughing joyfully as they chased butterflies. I stood on the terrace, watching the Chicago sunlight illuminate the grass. For a moment, I heard my own soul whisper, "Delaney, you finally built your own castle." The first seminar was attended by over 20 women. Some were bouncing toddlers on their hips. Some were still in their diner aprons or warehouse uniforms. Some had fresh bruises they tried to hide with makeup. Some were just paralyzed by the fear of starting over with zero credit. I stood before them at the podium, my hands gripping the edges tightly, but my voice projected with absolute authority. "I am not going to give you toxic positivity and tell you everything happens for a reason. I am just here to tell you that surviving the worst day of your life is already a massive victory. Now, we rebuild." The whole room fell completely silent. 20 faces, 20 shattered lives, all staring at me as if I had just handed them a map out of hell. I understood that exact look in their eyes, because I used to stare at the ceiling with it every single night. As I was passing out the intake clipboards, Marlo suddenly leaned in and whispered in my ear, "Delaney, Vance is hovering outside the gate." I glanced through the bay window. I saw Vance standing on the sidewalk. His posture was slumped, his gaze empty, staring at the estate that used to be his birthright. He didn't try to buzz in, just stood for a few minutes, then turned his collar up against the wind and walked toward the bus stop. I let out a breath, but my chest didn't ache. The past was entirely in the rearview mirror. This grand building was now the engine of my new life. At that moment, I felt one thing with absolute clarity. I was no longer the terrified girl who begged for grocery money 10 years ago. During the coffee break, I stood on the terrace watching the lilac petals drift in the breeze. The air felt incredibly fresh. In that moment, I whispered to those who might be listening to my story. If you are reading this and feel a spark of sympathy, please follow my journey. Your encouragement is the motivation I need to share the surprising twists of the next chapter. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Please leave a comment below. I took a deep, grounding breath, feeling a surge of raw energy flood my veins. And the biggest question echoed in my mind. Would my life from now on only be a smooth ride? Or was there another brutal test waiting around the corner? I didn't know yet, but I was armed and ready. For the first time in my existence, I was truly invincible. The first week, the Beacon House was fully operational. I was running on so much caffeine and adrenaline that I almost passed out while reading Beckett and Sloane their bedtime stories. But the exhaustion was a deeply satisfying physical tired, not the soul-crushing dread I used to feel. However, just as I was about to finally crash into bed, my phone started vibrating relentlessly. The caller ID showed Vance. I hesitated, then swiped to answer. His voice was frantic, breathless, and laced with absolute terror. "Delaney, they're going to kill me." I sat up straight, instantly wide awake. "Speak clearly, Vance. Stop hyperventilating." On the other end, I heard a trash can being knocked over, followed by the sound of him running down an alley. "I'm being hunted." The feds took the assets, but Mom had off-the-books debt. Underground money, loan sharks. Now they're saying because Vanguard Holdings bought the clean debt, I still owe the dirty money. I have absolutely nothing to give them. I gripped the blanket tightly. I knew his mother was shady, but I didn't realize she was dealing with organized crime. Vance continued, panting heavily. "The lawyers said the bankruptcy protects the corporate assets, but these guys don't care about federal bankruptcy court. Delaney, how did you pull off the Vanguard deal? Who is your backer? You have to tell them to buy out this marker too." Hearing that, my blood boiled. "Vance, I don't have a magical billionaire backer protecting me from the mob. I just leveraged public legal records to get my kids out of your toxic blast radius." A loud metallic crash echoed on his end. "I was an idiot. My mother destroyed us. Why didn't you warn me about the federal tip? Why didn't you protect me just this one last time like you always did?" I swung my legs out of bed, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Because I am no longer your human shield, Vance. You treated me like a disposable maid for 10 years. If I kept taking bullets for you, who was going to protect my children?" There was a tense silence on the other end, save for his ragged breathing. A few moments later, he let out a pathetic sob. "I am a dead man, Delaney. I have no money, no connections, no friends. Not a single person in Chicago will even open their door for me." I said coldly, "You only lost the wealth you stole. I lost my entire 20s serving a family of narcissists. Go to the police, Vance. That is my only advice." Vance wept loudly. It was the absolute breakdown of a man who used to mock me for crying over broken plates. Strangely, my heart didn't even flutter with sympathy. His tears couldn't thaw a heart he had spent a decade freezing solid. Late that night, Marlowe sent an encrypted text. "Vance just got rejected by the local precinct. They said they can't offer protective custody without him wearing a wire against the loan sharks, and he is too cowardly to do it. He is officially on his own." I read it and locked my screen. No gloating, no guilt. You play with fire, you burn alone. I had spent 10 years walking on glass, and now I was finally walking on solid ground. The next morning, as I was wrapping up a resume building workshop at the Beacon House, the heavy oak doors swung open. I turned around. Vance stood in the foyer. Seeing him in the daylight was jarring. He looked like a walking corpse. His face was hollow, his eyes darting frantically, his designer shirt replaced by a filthy, torn hoodie. He approached the podium, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "Delaney, just give me 5 minutes, please." The women in the workshop exchanged nervous glances. I calmly asked my assistant to take over the mock interviews, then escorted Vance to the side garden, the exact spot where Cordelia used to force me to scrub the patio furniture. Vance stood there trembling, then said, "I completely lost. I lost to your intelligence, and I lost to my own greed. I came here to apologize, not to manipulate you into saving me, but so I don't go out being remembered entirely as a monster." I looked at him, the former golden boy of the country club, now begging for forgiveness like a terrified child. I asked softly, "Do you finally understand why I had to burn it all down?" He nodded, a tear tracking through the dirt on his cheek. "Because I was a coward. Because I let my mother treat you like a stray dog. Because I never once defended my own wife." I replied firmly, Yes. And because my priority is Beckett and Sloan, I refuse to let my daughter grow up thinking abuse is love, and I refuse to let my son grow up to be a man like you. Vance flinched violently, biting his lip until it bled. I deserve that. I know I do. I just ask for one final favor. Let me say goodbye to the kids. Just in case. I studied his face. He genuinely believed he might not survive the week. You can see them this Sunday at the public park in broad daylight. But remember, they need to see a father who is trying, not a man who has completely surrendered. Vance bowed his head, his shoulders dropping in defeat, then turned and walked out the wrought iron gates without looking back. No toxic threats, no gaslighting. And I knew that was the exact moment the ghost of my marriage finally evaporated. That afternoon, as I was watering the hydrangeas in the courtyard of the Beacon House, the breeze coming off Lake Michigan carried the crisp scent of autumn. The purple petals fluttered to the ground. Suddenly, I felt an overwhelming wave of gratitude. If I hadn't endured a decade of psychological warfare, I would never possess the ruthless strength to run this empire. If I hadn't been treated like dirt, I wouldn't know how to build a fortress on this very soil. I whispered to myself, Delaney, the only direction is forward. No more checking the rearview mirror. The Chicago wind whipped through my hair, sealing the promise. I scheduled Vance's supervised visit for Sunday afternoon. Not because my heart bled for him, but because my kids deserved closure, no matter how deeply flawed their father was. That Sunday felt unseasonably warm. I took Beckett and Sloan to the playground near Oak Ridge Magnet School, a bustling public area with plenty of witnesses. When we arrived, Vance was already sitting on a green bench. He had clearly tried to clean up. His jeans were washed, his hair combed, his boots wiped down. He lacked the arrogant swagger of his real estate days, resembling instead a man desperately clinging to his last shred of humanity. Beckett and Sloan hesitated, looking up at me for the green light. I nodded reassuringly. The twins walked slowly toward the bench. Hi, Dad, Sloan chirped cautiously. Vance immediately dropped to his knees on the concrete, his hands shaking violently as he pulled them into a hug. Beckett, Sloan, Dad is so sorry for missing so many weekends. Beckett looked at him with intense, judging eyes. Dad, Mom says showing up on time is the bare minimum. She says adults have to back up their words with actions so kids feel safe. The brutal honesty of a child was a direct hit to his chest. Vance squeezed his eyes shut, nodding frantically. Dad is going to do better. I swear to you both. I am going to try. I stood 20 feet away, arms crossed, monitoring the interaction. Life has a twisted sense of humor. The man who used to scream at me over wrinkled dress shirts was now weeping on public concrete just for 5 minutes with his own children. They sat on the grass and talked for a while. The first few minutes were incredibly tense, but eventually, I heard a small laugh from Sloan. I took a few steps back to lean against a large oak tree, giving them a tiny bubble of privacy. And that was exactly when the man who would alter the entire trajectory of my life rolled into view. A matte black Trek mountain bike braked smoothly near my tree. The man straddling it was striking, probably in his early 40s. He wore a fitted athletic shirt, sleeves pushed up revealing strong forearms, and a ruggedly handsome face. His dark hair was peppered with silver at the temples, giving him a distinct, commanding aura. He pulled a stainless steel water bottle from his backpack and held it out. You left this in the seminar room on Friday. I figured I might catch you around the neighborhood. I blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. It was Mr. Harrison Sterling, the father of a student I used to tutor for the SATs, and a major silent donor to the Beacon House. I took the bottle, my fingers brushing his. Thank you, Harrison. My brain has been in a million places lately. He smiled, a genuine, easy expression. Don't apologize. Running a nonprofit is basically extreme sports. His voice was a rich baritone, incredibly grounding. He was the kind of man who didn't need to dominate a room to control it. His mere presence felt as solid and reliable as a steel beam. He leaned against the tree beside me, keeping a highly respectful distance. Are those your twins? They have your intensity. Yes, that's Beckett and Sloan. He casually glanced at the emotional scene playing out on the grass, then lowered his voice so only I could hear. And I assume that is the ex-husband. I let out a tired breath. Yes, he is their father, but he is entirely in my past. Harrison nodded. He didn't ask invasive questions, didn't offer unsolicited advice, and didn't judge. His emotional intelligence was staggering. A minute later, he looked down at me and asked, Are you running on fumes, Delaney? Organizing resources for dozens of traumatized women while carrying your own load? I imagine the foundation you built all this on came at a massive personal cost. I let out a dry chuckle. The trauma gave me thick skin, Harrison. But the pain is exactly what taught me how to finally prioritize my own survival. He was quiet for a long moment, watching the wind rustle the leaves, before saying something that made the breath catch in my throat. You are an absolute force of nature, Delaney. But being the strongest person in the room can also be incredibly lonely. I snapped my head to look at him. I scoured his eyes for pity, but I only found profound, piercing understanding. His gaze seemed to easily bypass the titanium armor I had spent 10 years welding together. Before pushing off his bike pedal, he spoke again. If you are open to it, I would love to cook dinner for you and the twins this weekend. My son, Holden, won't stop talking about your kids. He actually told me, Beckett's mom has the coolest smile ever. I laughed, feeling a sudden, unexpected heat rise to my cheeks. Let me check our schedule. He nodded, absolutely zero pressure in his posture. Take your time, but I really want to hear the rest of your story. A woman who can walk through hell and come out building castles is someone I want to know. He gave a polite nod, clicked his helmet strap, and pedaled down the paved trail, leaving behind the faint scent of cedar and clean laundry. I stared after him. My pulse was thumping wildly against my ribs. It's not a crush, I firmly told myself. It is just shockingly rare to have a man look at me with absolute respect, instead of expecting me to serve him. That evening, as I was boiling pasta for dinner, the twins were completely wired from their park outing. I, on the other hand, was entirely distracted. Harrison's deep voice echoed in my kitchen. Being the strongest person in the room can also be incredibly lonely. For the first time since signing those divorce papers, I looked at my reflection in the microwave door and asked myself a terrifying question. Do I deserve a healthy relationship? Is the universe actually handing me a second chance? I didn't realize it yet, but that second chance had already crossed the threshold. A completely different kind of life was knocking, and it wasn't asking for permission. I didn't text Harrison back immediately. When you spend a decade locked in a psychological war zone, you treat every nice gesture like a potential landmine. But fate operates on its own timeline. 3 days later, it was Harrison's son, Holden, who bypassed all my defenses. That Wednesday, the after-school coding program ran late. As I was zipping up Sloane's jacket, I saw a stocky little boy with a massive Minecraft backpack shifting his weight by the exit. He spotted me and practically sprinted over. Miss Delaney, my dad is making his famous slow-cooked beef stew tonight. He told me I was in charge of officially inviting you and the twins to our condo. I glanced toward the parking lot and saw Harrison leaning against a black SUV. He looked slightly embarrassed by his son's aggressive diplomatic tactics, rubbing the back of his neck with a sheepish grin. I couldn't possibly say no. An invitation from a handsome man triggers all my defensive alarms, but an invitation from an excited 10-year-old completely disarms me. I smiled warmly. Wow, that sounds amazing, Holden. We would love to come over. The kid threw his hands up in victory like he had just won the Super Bowl. Harrison's residence was a high-rise condo overlooking the Chicago skyline. The space was impeccably clean, masculine but warm, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the glittering city. It was the absolute opposite of the Kensington estate, which had always felt like a drafty museum. As soon as I took off my coat, the rich aroma of rosemary and braised beef hit me. Harrison was standing at the kitchen island, sleeves rolled up over his forearms, expertly dicing potatoes as if he were hosting a cooking show. I stood paralyzed for a second. A highly successful man who handled domestic chores with effortless confidence. Beckett and Sloane's jaws dropped. Mom, he cooks way better than you. My face flushed crimson. Hey, keep your voices down, you're ruining my reputation. Harrison chuckled, tossing the vegetables into a cast-iron Dutch oven. I just follow a good recipe. It's nowhere near as impressive as Delaney's organizational skills, but I wanted to make sure you guys got a home-cooked meal. I stared at him, my chest tightening. A man who cooks for you not to secure leverage or demand praise, but simply because he wants to lighten your mental load. It was an alien concept to me. Sitting around the modern dining table, Harrison interacted with the kids effortlessly. He didn't talk down to them. He casually told his son, Holden, a guy can survive on frozen pizza when he's single, but when you invite VIP guests over, you have to bring your A-game. Holden took a massive bite of a dinner roll. Who's the VIP, Dad? Harrison's eyes flicked to me, his gaze incredibly warm, like the sun breaking through winter clouds. I choked slightly on my water, staring intently at my bowl of stew. My heart was sprinting a marathon. He smoothly changed the subject, but the message was loud and clear. Beckett nudged my elbow and whispered loudly, "Mom, why is your face so red?" I tapped his bowl with my spoon. "Focus on chewing, detective." The whole table erupted in laughter. It hit me like a ton of bricks how long it had been since I had laughed without a filter. No anxiety about saying the wrong thing, no fear of breaking protocol, no dodging verbal bullets, just pure, unadulterated joy. After the kids migrated to the living room to play video games, Harrison handed me a steaming mug of jasmine tea. The floral scent was incredibly soothing. He leaned against the counter and said, "Delaney, I know you have been to hell and back. I'm not bringing it up to pry. I just want you to know, my own marriage ended in a pretty brutal wreck a few years ago. I know exactly how much courage it takes to trust someone's intentions again. I am not trying to rush you. I just want to stand in your corner, for however long you'll let me." I held the warm ceramic mug tightly with both hands. This man was lethal. Every word out of his mouth was meticulously calculated to make me feel safe. No grandiose promises, no savior complex, just extending the exact thing a survivor craves the most. Rock-solid respect. I looked down, my voice barely above a whisper. "You are being far too kind to us, Harrison. I come with an unbelievable amount of baggage. I'm afraid it's too much." Harrison immediately set his mug down and stepped closer, his voice dropping into a firm, commanding tone. "Absolutely not. You are a woman who shielded 2 kids from a nightmare and then built a sanctuary for dozens of others out of the ashes. Your baggage is proof of your resilience. Do not ever let anyone make you feel like you are a burden." I smiled, blinking rapidly to keep the tears from falling. It had been a lifetime since a man had validated my worth with such unwavering certainty. As we were getting ready to leave, Harrison draped my trench coat over my shoulders. "The wind is picking up off the lake tonight. Make sure you blast the heat in the car. If the CEO goes down with a cold, the whole operation halts." The comment was casual, but it struck a deep nerve. Whenever I got sick in the past, Cordelia would roll her eyes and demand I finish cooking dinner, while Vance would just tell me to stop complaining and pop an aspirin. Nobody ever considered my health as vital. I stepped into the elevator, fully aware that my heavily guarded heart was already cracking wide open for this man. When I got the kids tucked into bed back at our apartment, my phone screen lit up. A text from Vance. "Delaney, I know I have zero right to ask this, but please tell me you aren't getting serious with that guy from the park. I can't stomach the thought of another man raising my kids." I tossed the phone onto the sofa with a hard sigh. Vance didn't want the responsibility of being a husband, but his fragile ego couldn't handle me thriving without him. A cold draft rattled the window pane, a stark reminder that peace is rarely permanent. A phenomenal new man was stepping up to the plate, and a desperate ghost from my past was actively spiraling. The real test was just gearing up. For a few days after that dinner, I walked around the Beacon House with a secret smile, feeling completely rejuvenated. But reality loves to crash the party, and it usually uses the past as a battering ram. Monday morning, as I was leading a financial literacy workshop for a dozen single moms, the security guard poked his head through the door, looking highly uncomfortable. "Miss Delaney, sorry to interrupt. There is a man aggressively demanding to see you at the front desk. He claims he's your ex-husband." My stomach dropped. I immediately went on the defensive. I walked out to the lobby. Vance was pacing on the hardwood floor, looking even more unhinged than last week. His eyes were bloodshot, radiating a frantic, possessive energy that made my skin crawl. I stopped 10 feet away, crossing my arms. "What is the emergency, Vance?" Vance swallowed hard, glancing at the security guard. "I need to talk to you in private. 5 minutes." I stood my ground. "This is a secure facility. You can talk right here." Vance clenched his fists, lowering his voice into a harsh hiss. "I ran a background check on the license plate of that SUV you got into on Wednesday. Harrison Sterling, a wealthy venture capitalist. Are you sleeping with him?" My jaw tightened. "Are you out of your mind? Have you been stalking me?" Vance took a step forward, his eyes wild. "Because I am the father of those kids. I am not going to let some billionaire step in and play daddy just because I hit a rough patch." I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "A rough patch? You committed federal fraud, emotionally destroyed your family, and got blacklisted by the entire city of Chicago." Vance pointed a trembling finger at me. "I know I messed up, but you are my wife. Those are my kids. I am terrified he is just using you." I cut him off, my voice slicing through the lobby like a machete. "Do not ever disrespect me in my own building. You do not get to be terrified for me. Are you afraid I am going to get hurt? Or are you having a panic attack because another man is effortlessly providing the security you were too incompetent to build? Vance flinched as if I had physically struck him across the jaw. His face drained of color. I took one step closer, staring directly into his pathetic eyes. Let me make this crystal clear. You have supervised visitation rights. You do not have an opinion on my personal life. I am done living in your shadow. If you ever run a background check on my associates again, I will file a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. Vance backed up, his breathing shallow. I am just trying to protect my family. He doesn't know you like I do. I smiled a cold, terrifying smile. You are absolutely right. He actually treats me like a human being. Now get out of my lobby. I turned my back and walked straight toward my office. I didn't look back, but the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. A desperate man with nothing left to lose is the most dangerous animal on earth. That afternoon, after the last seminar wrapped, I walked out the back exit and froze. Harrison was crouched down in the courtyard, wearing a fitted gray Henley, holding a cordless drill. He was repairing the hinge on the heavy wooden gate that had been sticking all week. He looked up, wiping a smear of grease off his jaw, and flashed a brilliant smile. This gate was a safety hazard. Anyone could have pried it open. Figured I would reinforce it while I was waiting for you to finish up. I stood there, completely stunned. Harrison, you run a massive investment firm. You do not need to be doing handyman work at my nonprofit. Harrison stood up, dusting off his jeans, and slid the drill into his toolbox. I had a free hour, and I like fixing things. Plus, when you care about someone's safety, you don't form a committee to discuss it. You just grab a drill and fix the damn gate. The sheer pragmatism of his words hit me right in the chest. A man who didn't offer empty platitudes or demand applause. He just actively removed obstacles from my path. I stepped closer, my voice softening. You really didn't have to do this. He looked down at me, his dark eyes intense and incredibly focused. Delaney, I am not trying to buy your affection with acts of service. I am doing it because you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders every single day. A woman raising twins and running a sanctuary deserves a man who will happily fix her gates so she can finally rest. My heart did a full somersault. Harrison then bent down to pack up his screws. I watched the flex of his shoulders, realizing with absolute clarity that this man never cornered me, never issued ultimatums, never tried to clip my wings. He just quietly reinforced the ground beneath my feet. If only I had known love could look like this a decade ago. That night, after I locked all the deadbolts in our apartment, my phone screen flashed on the kitchen counter. A text from an unknown, untraceable number. Is it true your kids attend Oak Ridge Magnet School? You should really watch your back, Delaney. Some people are extremely unhappy with how comfortable you're getting in Chicago. A block of ice formed in my stomach. This wasn't country club gossip. This was a targeted, physical threat against my children. I immediately dialed Marlo. Marlo, I need you to run a trace on a burner number right now. Someone is threatening the twins. Marlo's tone instantly shifted from casual to deadly serious. Read me the text. I read it verbatim. Marlo typed rapidly on her keyboard in the background. Delaney, this does not sound like Vance. He is a coward, not a hitman. This reeks of the underground loan sharks Cordelia was tied up with. They might think you siphoned off the Kensington money before the feds seized the accounts. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, my knuckles turning white. Marlo, I don't give a damn about myself. But if they even look at Beckett and Sloan, Marlo interrupted firmly. Listen to me very carefully. You are not fighting this alone anymore. I am looping in my private investigator, and I am calling Harrison. I gasped. Don't drag him into this nightmare, Marlo. Marlo scoffed. Delaney, that man is fully invested. If I don't tell him, he will fire me as his corporate counsel. Lock your doors. Do not engage with the number. We are handling this. I sank into a kitchen chair, my heart hammering against my ribs. My maternal instincts were screaming at max volume. A storm was brewing, dark and violent, and I had to prepare for war. But as I glanced toward the living room window, I felt a strange sense of grounding, because this time, I wasn't going into battle unarmed and abandoned. I had a shark of a lawyer on speed dial, and a man who would gladly tear down the city to keep me safe. The next chapter was about to get ugly, but I was ready to fight. The night after receiving that anonymous threat, I didn't sleep a single minute. I sat in a hard chair by the front door, a baseball bat resting against my knee, analyzing every creak of the floorboards. When you have survived the darkest corners of emotional abuse, your nervous system treats every shadow like an assassin. The next morning, I rushed Beckett and Sloan into the back seat of my 10-year-old hatchback, locking the doors the second they were strapped in. Just as I was putting the car in drive, a sleek black Range Rover pulled up aggressively, blocking me in. I panicked, my hand flying to the horn, until the driver's side window rolled down. It was Harrison. His jaw was clenched, his expression grim but tightly controlled. He stepped out and approached my window. "Delaney, roll it down." I cracked the window, my heart in my throat. "Harrison, what are you doing here?" He rested his hands on the doorframe, leaning in close. "Marlo called me at 2 a.m. I have my private security team running sweeps on the neighborhood right now." I shook my head, overwhelmed. "Harrison, you can't be out here playing bodyguard. You have a business to run." Harrison reached through the crack in the window and gently cupped my cheek. The contact sent a shockwave of warmth straight through my panic. "My business can run itself today. Listen to me." A text like that is usually a cowardly intimidation tactic, meant to panic you into making a mistake, but we aren't taking any chances. He pulled a heavy matte black key fob from his jacket pocket and dropped it through the window onto my lap. "This is a military-grade GPS tracker with a silent panic button. Keep it in your pocket. If a car follows you, or if you feel a shadow cross your path, press the red button 3 times. I will have my security team on your exact coordinates in under 3 minutes." I stared at the device, completely stunned. "You are treating this like a cartel hit." Harrison looked me dead in the eyes, his voice dropping an octave. "I am treating it like a threat against the woman I care about. And in my world, we do not leave things to chance." Those words hit me like a physical blow. A man who understood that true safety isn't loud bravado, it is calculated, unyielding protocol. He didn't tell me to calm down or call me paranoid. He just handed me a lifeline. "Harrison, you worry way too much about us." He didn't break eye contact. "I worry because I want the job. I worry because you are my priority." I was completely flustered, my pulse racing. Before I could formulate a response, he stepped back from the car. "Go drop the kids at school. I will be tailing you 2 cars back. Do not panic, just drive normally." My God, how did I survive a decade with a coward when men like this actually existed? That afternoon, I was huddled in my office at the Beacon House, reviewing the security footage, when Marlo burst through the door, looking furious. "Delaney, we have a major problem." I stood up instantly. "What did your investigator find?" Marlo slapped a glossy photograph onto my desk. They traced the burner phone ping to a cell tower near the Calumet River. But that's not the worst part. I looked down at the photo. My blood turned to ice. It was a surveillance shot of Beckett and Sloan playing tetherball in the Oak Ridge Magnet School courtyard, taken through a chain-link fence. Marlo's voice was sharp. "It is definitely not Vance. He doesn't have the stomach or the budget for private surveillance. This is the underground syndicate Cordelia owed money to. They think you are sitting on offshore accounts that belong to the Kensington estate." I grabbed the edge of the desk, nausea washing over me. "Marlo, they are watching my babies. I need to pull them out of school right now." Marlo grabbed my shoulders. "Delaney, breathe. Harrison has 2 plainclothes security guys stationed across the street from the school right now. They are covered." I swallowed a dry lump in my throat. Just knowing Harrison had already deployed a shield around my kids made me feel like I could actually breathe. I left work an hour early to pick up the twins. But when I pulled up to the Oak Ridge dismissal zone, I saw Vance standing by the flagpole. He looked incredibly agitated, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I marched up to him, furious. "What the hell are you doing here? Today is not your visitation day." Vance put his hands up defensively, his voice trembling. "Delaney, please. My mother had a massive stroke this morning. She is on life support at Chicago Med. The doctors say she might not make it through the night. I just want to take the kids to the ICU to say goodbye. It will take 1 hour." I looked at my children, who were clutching their backpacks, looking confused. Sloan tugged my sleeve. "Mom, is Grandma dying?" Beckett stared at Vance coldly. "Will Grandma promise not to yell at Mom if we go?" Vance choked back a sob, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "She can't speak, buddy. She just wants to see you." I stood there, torn between my fierce hatred for that woman and the moral obligation of letting a grandmother say a final goodbye. I checked the time. "You have exactly 2 hours. You take them to the hospital, you do not leave their side, and you bring them straight back to my apartment. Do you understand me?" Vance nodded violently, practically shaking with relief. "I swear to God, Delaney." 2 hours. "Thank you." But as he ushered the kids into his battered sedan, the look in his eyes wasn't just grief. It was a wild, desperate panic. A massive red flag went up in my brain, but he was already pulling away from the curb. Exactly 2 hours later, I was pacing my apartment. My phone chimed with a text from Vance. Delaney, I am so sorry. The ICU visit took longer than expected, and the kids were hungry. I'm taking them through a drive-thru for burgers. We will be an hour late. I immediately dialed his number. Straight to voicemail. Where the hell are you? I texted back. Delivered, but not read. I called again. Voicemail. A wave of pure, unadulterated terror crashed over me. I remembered the tracker Harrison had given me that morning. I dug it out of my jacket pocket. My hands were shaking so violently I nearly dropped it. 1, 2, 3. I pressed the red button 3 times. Not even 10 seconds later, my phone rang. It was Harrison. His voice was terrifyingly calm, stripping away all emotion to focus entirely on logistics. Delaney, the signal is live. I have your coordinates. What is the situation? Harrison! Vance took the kids to see Cordelia at the hospital, but he's gone rogue. His phone is off. I can't track them. Harrison didn't hesitate for a microsecond. Lock your front door, run downstairs. I am pulling up to your building right now. But the school, the police, I already have a team pulling traffic cam footage on Vance's license plate, he commanded. Get in my car. We are hunting him down. I sprinted down the 3 flights of stairs. I wasn't just terrified of Vance doing something stupid. I was terrified because I finally understood what it felt like to have a man treat my crisis like an absolute state of emergency. Less than a minute later, his black Range Rover screeched to a halt in front of my building. I threw open the passenger door and jumped in. Harrison's jaw was set like granite, his eyes scanning the road with lethal focus. Put your seatbelt on, Delaney. I am going to find your kids. At that exact moment, the transition was complete. This man was no longer just a supportive romantic prospect. He was a gladiator stepping directly into the arena, placing his own body between my children and a looming catastrophe. And that is when the nightmare officially began. Harrison drove like a professional stunt driver, weaving through the congested Chicago gridlock with terrifying precision. Streetlights blurred into streaks of neon. My chest was so tight I was gasping for air. My phone remained dead silent. Still no word from Vance. I was losing my mind. Harrow threw me, if those loan sharks got to my babies. He cut me off, his voice a steady, unbreakable anchor. Do not go down that spiral. They are alive. We are getting them back. Do you trust me? He didn't look for validation. He demanded focus. The absolute certainty in his tone gave me the tether I needed to keep from passing out. Harrison tapped the glowing console screen on his dashboard. My security detail just flagged Vance's sedan. Traffic cameras caught him exiting the Dan Ryan Expressway 10 minutes ago. He is heading deep into the industrial district on 18th Street. I whipped my head toward him. You hacked the city traffic grid? I have resources, he stated flatly, and I monitor anything that poses a threat to your orbit. The sheer power at this man's fingertips was staggering. The Range Rover skidded to a halt near an abandoned stretch of commercial warehouses. He threw the SUV into park and grabbed a heavy maglite from the center console. My guys interviewed a food truck vendor down the block. He saw Vance's sedan turn into this alley with 2 kids in the back seat. Stay right behind me. I didn't argue. I unbuckled and sprinted after him into the darkness. The alley was a graveyard of rusted shipping containers and broken glass. The wind howled through the chain-link fences, sounding eerily like human cries. The stench of stale beer and damp concrete made me gag. Harrison walked point, sweeping the intense flashlight beam across the shadows. Beckett, Sloan, where are you? My voice cracked, echoing off the brick walls. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my pocket. The screen flashed Vance's name. I answered on the first ring, putting it on speaker. Vance, where the hell are my children? Vance's voice was a frantic, hyperventilating mess. Delaney, I am so sorry. Oh God, I am so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. I took them to the hospital, but 2 SUVs boxed me in on the expressway. They followed me from the clinic. Delaney, I am being hunted. I felt the blood drain from my face. Who? Who has you boxed in? The syndicate, Vance screamed into the receiver. They work for a guy Mom owed $2 million to. They know the feds froze the bank accounts, but they think you hid the liquid cash. They said the text message was a warning, but I thought I could outrun them. My knees buckled. Where are Beckett and Sloan, Vance? They have them, Delaney, Vance sobbed hysterically. They dragged me out of the car and locked the kids inside their SUV. They said to meet them at the abandoned shipping yard by the Calumet River. They want $50,000 in cash right now as a down payment, or they are putting the car in the river. They told me to bring you. I let out a guttural scream, dropping the phone onto the asphalt. Harrison snatched it up seamlessly. "Vance, listen to me," Harrison barked, his voice radiating pure, lethal authority. "This is Harrison Sterling. Do exactly as they say. Keep them talking. Do not try to be a hero. We are 3 minutes away." Harrison grabbed my shoulders, pulling me back to reality. "Delaney, look at me. Vance is an idiot, but the kids are collateral. These guys want cash, not a murder charge. We are going to the shipping yard." "I don't have $50,000, Harrison," I sobbed hysterically. He gripped my face, his thumbs wiping my tears. "I do. I will wire them $5 million if that is what it takes. Now get back in the car." When we tore into the abandoned shipping yard along the Calumet River, my absolute worst nightmare was waiting under the sickly yellow glow of a single halogen floodlight. Two massive, heavily tattooed enforcers stood leaning against the hood of a black Suburban. In the back seat, pressing their terrified, tear-streaked faces against the tinted glass, were Beckett and Sloan. Vance was on his knees in the gravel, his hands clasped together, begging like a dog. "Please, man, I'll rob a bank. I'll do whatever you want. Just let my kids out. Take me instead," the larger enforcer sneered, casually kicking a rusty bolt directly at Vance's face. "You're a broke joke, Kensington. We want the ex-wife. She's the one holding the Vanguard purse strings." Harrison threw the Range Rover into park, the headlights blinding the two men, and stepped out of the vehicle. He didn't rush them. He didn't pull a weapon. He walked forward with the slow, terrifying calm of a man who owned entire cities. I stayed right behind his broad shoulders. "There has been a severe miscalculation here." Harrison's voice boomed across the gravel, echoing off the steel shipping containers. He held up his smartphone, the screen glowing brightly in the dark. "The woman you are hunting is a public school teacher. She doesn't have your money. But I do." The enforcers squinted against the headlights, evaluating the man in front of them. "And who the hell are you?" the lead thug barked. Harrison opened his banking app and turned the screen around. "I am the CEO of Sterling Capital. I am looking at a liquid account with 8 figures in it. Let the children out of that vehicle right now, and I will wire $50,000 directly into whatever offshore routing number you provide. Consider it a highly motivated business transaction. You take the wire, you walk away, and you never breathe in this woman's direction again." It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Harrison didn't threaten them with the police. He offered them a bloodless, highly profitable exit strategy. I witnessed the stark, humiliating contrast between Vance's pathetic groveling in the dirt and Harrison's absolute, unwavering power. The lead enforcer hesitated, exchanging a greedy look with his partner. "Show us the routing confirmation first." "You unlock those doors right now, or the deal is dead," Harrison commanded, his tone dropping to a glacial chill. After 5 agonizing seconds of silence, the enforcer hit the unlock button on his key fob. The heavy SUV doors popped open. Beckett and Sloan scrambled out of the back seat and sprinted across the gravel, screaming, "Mommy!" I dropped to my knees, catching them in my arms, burying my face in their hair, sobbing uncontrollably. My entire body shook with violent relief. While I clutched my children, I watched Harrison calmly type a routing number into his phone, authorize a massive wire transfer, and hold the confirmation screen up for the thugs to verify. The enforcers checked their own burner phone, grunted in satisfaction, climbed into the Suburban, and peeled out of the shipping yard, disappearing into the Chicago night. Vance remained kneeling in the dirt, a completely broken shell of a man. Harrison didn't even look at him. He walked straight over to me, kneeling beside us in the gravel, his focus entirely on our safety. He placed a large, steady hand on the back of my neck. "It's over, Delaney. I've got you. They are safe." I hugged the twins so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. Vance crawled over to us, his face smeared with grease and tears, gasping for air. "Delaney, I am so sorry. They boxed me in on the highway. I swear to God I didn't know they were tailing me. I was forced." I couldn't even process his pathetic excuses. My eyes were entirely locked on Harrison. His designer jacket was covered in dust, but his gaze was locked onto me like a laser. He stood up, offering me his hand, pulling me up from the dirt. I looked at him, my heart constricting so painfully I thought it might burst. "Harrison, you just paid $50,000 for my children." He let out a long, heavy breath, his voice rough with emotion. "Delaney, There is only one thing I want to say right now. I looked up. The wind whipping off the Calumet River was freezing, but the fiery intensity in his dark eyes made me forget the cold. He pulled me slightly closer, his thumb tracing my jawline. From now on, you will never have to fight a battle alone ever again. I am here. And at that exact moment, standing in a desolate shipping yard, surrounded by gravel, dust, and the fading adrenaline of pure terror, I knew my life had permanently shifted on its axis. The storm was finally over. A completely new chapter was opening, and it was blindingly bright. After that horrifying night at the shipping yard, my nervous system was completely fried. I spent the entire night curled up in bed with my 2 children, refusing to let them out of my sight. Sloane slept with her head on my left arm, Beckett on my right. Their small hands gripped my shirt tightly, terrified I would vanish. As dawn broke over the Chicago skyline, I knew I could no longer play defense. I could not let the radioactive fallout of the Kensington family keep poisoning our future. That morning, after Harrison arranged for a private security detail to drive the kids to school, I decided I had to confront Vance one last time. I told him to meet me at a crowded coffee shop in the Loop. Harrison insisted on coming, but I told him this was a cord I had to cut myself. He stared at me intently, analyzing my resolve, before finally nodding. If anything feels wrong, press the red button on the fob. I don't care if it's just a bad vibe. I will clear out the entire block. I nodded, feeling an immense wave of gratitude for his absolute support. Vance was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in. He looked like a ghost. His skin was pale, his eyes sunken, his hands trembling violently around a paper coffee cup. I sat down across from him, my posture rigid. Vance, no more lies, no more deflecting. I want to know exactly why a crime syndicate was hunting my children. He swallowed hard, rubbing his temples, his voice a pathetic rasp. Delaney, I kept this buried because I was terrified. The truth is, my mother didn't just take out fraudulent bank loans for the real estate firm. She borrowed millions from an underground syndicate to cover up massive embezzlement charges. When the commercial market crashed and she couldn't pay the VIG, they threatened to wipe out our entire bloodline. A cold sweat broke out across my back. Vance continued, staring into his black coffee. When the feds seized the estate and froze the corporate accounts, the syndicate didn't buy the bankruptcy story. They thought my mother had liquidated the assets and hidden the cash. When they found out the distressed debt was acquired by Vanguard Holdings and that you were the director of the new project inside the mansion, they put the pieces together wrong. I slammed my palm onto the table. They thought I was the one hoarding the stolen money. Vance squeezed his eyes shut. Exactly. They were convinced you were sitting on my mother's hidden millions. I let out a harsh, bitter laugh. Millions? You know damn well I never had access to a single bank account in that house. I was pawning my jewelry to buy macaroni and cheese. Vance pounded his fist weakly on his thigh. But they don't care about facts, Delaney. They don't do forensic accounting. They just needed leverage to force you to empty whatever accounts they thought you controlled. I took a long, deep breath, trying to control the rage boiling in my veins. Why didn't you tell me from the very beginning? Why did you let this toxic waste spill over onto my children? He choked on a sob, burying his face in his hands. Because I was humiliated. Because I was terrified you would realize how truly pathetic I am. Because my ego convinced me I could handle the debt collectors myself. I looked at the broken man sitting across from me. After a long minute of heavy silence, I spoke in the calmest, coldest tone I could muster. Vance, what disgusts me the most isn't the financial fraud or the bankruptcy. It is the undeniable fact that your ego was more important to you than the lives of your own children. Vance jolted, his eyes bloodshot and pleading. Delaney, I swear on my life I never wanted to put them in the crosshairs. I didn't know the SUVs were tailing me from the hospital. If anything had happened to Beckett and Sloane last night, I would have thrown myself in the river. I stood up, pushing my chair back sharply. I am out of empathy for you. This is the absolute end of the line. From this day forward, you are biologically the father of Beckett and Sloane. But my life, and their safety, is completely severed from the Kensington family curse. Vance hung his head, his shoulders shaking as he wept silently in the middle of the coffee shop. Live a sober, honest life, Vance. Give the kids a reason not to be ashamed of your last name. That is the only expectation I have left for you. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit. Vance's pathetic, wavering voice called out behind me, Delaney, thank you for not letting them kill me. I didn't bother turning around. Frankly, I had exhausted my capacity to hate him. I just wanted to finally live. When I pushed through the glass doors of the coffee shop, Harrison was leaning against his black SUV parked directly by the curb. He must have been waiting outside the entire time, ready to breach the doors if I hadn't walked out. Seeing me, he didn't demand a play-by-play, didn't ask if I was okay, didn't need me to explain my emotional state. He simply stepped forward, opened his arms, and said in that rich, grounding voice, "Come here." For the first time in my life, I surrendered control. I stepped into his chest, burying my face in his heavy wool coat. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me tight against him. It wasn't a desperate clinging hug, it was a fortress. It felt like being pulled back from the edge of a jagged cliff. His heartbeat was steady against my cheek, his breath warm near my ear. "Delaney, from this second forward, nobody will ever dare to threaten you or those kids again. That is a guarantee." The dam finally broke. I cried. Years of repressed terror, exhaustion, and isolation just poured out of me onto his coat. He held me tighter, one hand firmly pressing the back of my head against his chest. "From today, let me carry the heavy lifting. Not because you need saving, but because I choose you." I trembled, overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of his words. For the first time in my 30-odd years on this earth, I felt fiercely, intentionally chosen. Not chosen to be a trophy wife, not chosen to be a free maid, but chosen because I was exactly who I was, a battle-scarred woman who had survived the hurricane and was now staring at a breathtaking sunrise. I tilted my head back, looking up into his intense, protective eyes, and whispered, "Harrison, thank you for showing up right when I thought my legs were going to give out." He smiled, a slow, incredibly tender smile that reached his eyes, and gently brushed a tear from my cheek. "Delaney, my arrival was never late. And for the first time in over a decade, I believed it. I believed in this new, uncharted path. I believed in the titanium strength I had forged in the fire. I believed in the phenomenal man holding my hand. And I finally believed that this life, after subjecting me to 10 brutal years of storms, was absolutely ready to give me a brilliant, undeniable victory.